And this place is so important to me because I was born up the street on East Main Street, and this was my preschool. So I spent all of my early years there, and so my very first memories of being a child are right here in this room and in the classroom. So what a gift of a childhood in this community. And it's where I learned about my place in the world and how lucky I was. It's the place where I felt safe. So it's just such a full circle moment. And this church, this community has been supporting us every single year. And I'm just so grateful to be here. My book just launched this week. I was just your average, I'm just a typical standard B- kid. Nothing special, and I was a product of a very loving childhood. But other than that, you know, if you grow up here, it's like college. We're all going to college. Not if you're going, but where are you going, and what's the name of the school? I was very much that kid that was trying to like fit a mold and trying to get on this fast track of what I thought success was and what it had been deemed by the society and the culture that I grew up in. And suddenly, the only way I can really describe it is that I woke up one morning and was like, wait, I know all of these things that I'm supposed to be doing and all of these things that I've been told I'm supposed to do, but I have no idea who I am on the inside. And newsflash, college is like super expensive, and I just felt this like, how am I supposed to go spend all of this money and take loans when I have no idea what my purpose is or what I'm good at and what I want to be in the world? So that was the start of the journey. It was just like, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to travel. And it was not like, I'm going to go travel and like help kids. It was, I'm going to go have some fun and learn and explore outside of the four walls of the classroom for a while. That was it. That was the beginning. And then my second semester, I was like, well, I really love kids. I was a babysitter growing up. We grew up on a cul-de-sac with 3 girls, all teenagers. So we babysat. We were camp counselors and all of those things. And so I was like, can I just go someplace where I can work with kids? Because that was one thing I knew that I loved and that I was good at. And so I got placed in northeastern India. And what I didn't know at the time, a huge number of migrant refugee Nepalese, because in 2005, the year I graduated, there was a civil war going on across the border. And so I kind of got dropped into the Nepali community and was working in an organization. A woman running this program and project kind of took me under her wing. And that was my introduction to Nepal. And I couldn't have even placed Nepal on a map at that time. So I meet my friend Sunita, who, unlike me, she knew exactly where she was going. She wanted to be a doctor. She was going pre-med. And she's like, I don't know where I come from. She'd left her village when she was 8 years old as a product of the war, when children were being recruited to fight, and there was human trafficking and child labor and all the things that are wrapped up in war and how it affects women and children. And Sunita's like, let's go to my village together. Let's do it. So we pack up our backpacks and we go into the middle of the Midwestern region. And we trek for 3 days. At the end of the bus, we take an ox cart across the border, like the whole thing. And after 3 days of the most arduous journey, we find her home. And her family had all dissipated, and her home had been converted into a Maoist rebel base camp. Watching this experience through my friend, who's my age, and looking at and trying to reckon with the vast differences and the reality that it's all a crapshoot, it's all a lottery. We don't know why. I just had all these questions of why. And ultimately it came down to a riverbed, and I was walking across this dry riverbed and I saw dozens and dozens of children breaking rocks. And they were 3 years old, 5 years old, and they had mallets, and they were taking soccer ball size rocks out of the river, and they're breaking them into hundreds of pieces. And I was like, why are they breaking rocks? And they were like, oh, you can sell a huge body-sized bag of rocks at the end of the day for about $1. And that was how children were surviving. And it was just this moment for me on a riverbed where I was like, what is going on in this world? How have we figured out everything, all of these things? When I was their age, I was playing in the treehouse, and this is the reality of children all over the world. And so I was like, I'm going to stay. I can't do everything. I can do something. And there was this one little girl named Hema who said, Namaste, Didi. And I started with Hema, and we put Hema into school, and that was kind of the beginning of the story. And I was just like, one day I want to walk across this dry riverbed, and I don't want to see a single child breaking rocks. And today, there's not a single child breaking rocks. I'm 35. I lived in Nepal. And I adopted 58 children. I'm the mother to 58 kids. We run a school and a women's center, and so much more. And this is that story, it's the first time I had a chance. I'd always journaled and diaried and kept pages. I wanted to do it for my own children and pass it on to them. I started out with all of these whys, and I was just like, why is this happening in our world, and how do I make it better, and what's my place in it? And look at my privilege. What do I have to give? And I didn't have the language. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have anything. I had my babysitting money, which ultimately that was my $5,000 life saving. And I realized I had a lot to learn. And because I was young, I had this invincible, naive, I can do anything, we can do better, orphanages don't have to be like this. But also, because I was young, I knew I didn't know the answers. So that really helped me, that curiosity, that wanting to learn. And then I just dug in, and I found local women. I asked them what they saw as the needs in the community were, and I started to miserably learn Nepali, to which I speak now, obviously. We speak Nepali, but that was the start. And actually, there's this huge push and pull in the beginning, because I kind of go in thinking, I'm just going to throw my body into this. And you realize, oh, no. It's way more complicated than that. And the beginning arc of the story is just failure after failure, falling and falling and falling and pushing. And one example of this, if you can imagine, in Nepal, adolescent girls and women, when they're on their period, have to sleep in the cowshed. And for 5 nights, when I got my period, I slept in the cowshed with the cows. And because the menstrual activity is seen as being tainted, dirty, you can't touch the water source, you can't go into the kitchen. So I go in, and I'm like this kid from New Jersey sleeping in a cowshed. But as I got to know about this practice, it's called chowpatty in Nepali culture, there was this fire and this burning and this anger inside of me, because when girls and women sleep in the cowshed, even after you give birth, which if you've given birth, you bleed after, you're sleeping in a cowshed with your newborn baby. And so here I am, and I'm just like, girls are so at risk in these cowsheds because they freeze to death, they get snake bites, they're at risk, higher risk for sexual assault, and to warm themselves, they'll catch a fire and die of smoke inhalation. And so you go in and you're like, this is wrong, I want to fight this, but there's this culture, it's a culture. I want to fight early marriage or child marriage, but it's the culture. And in the schools, kids are hit and beaten with a stick, but it's the culture. So there's this whole, there's also really funny moments, like planting of the potatoes, or I had never planted a potato, and I didn't realize you had to cut the potatoes, or I bought a goat, and all of the aunties and uncles who live in the house were like, you bought a grandmother. She's like the worst investment ever made. You're so dumb. You don't even know how to buy a goat. And so they named our pet goat Bajay, which means grandma goat. And they were like, they just like would tease me, like I didn't know the difference between a cow and a buffalo or a cow and an ox. So we'd like joke. Some of it was like not all serious, you know. And ultimately, they were just like ripping me apart for this goat purchase. And then all of a sudden, grandmother goat started to get like really chubby and really fat and really big. And I was like, Grandma's getting big. And one day, I kid you not, she delivered triplets out of the blue. And I was like, you guys, boom shakalaka. She just delivered triplets. You teased me about that goat for 1 year. But so it was like this lightness of it all, but also this other underbelly of it, which was very dark. And navigating that as a girl from New Jersey. And figuring out the fights to fight and how to fight them. I had this superstar student, and she was the one winning debate, winning all the championships. She was just such a bright, shining star. And one day she just didn't show up to school. And we went looking for her, and we ultimately, after a series of events, find out that she'd been married off as a young person, and I thought that I could just change that and go scoop her up and bring her to counseling, and I couldn't. I failed miserably, as you read in that story, and I ended up in a very life-threatening situation where, again, it's our culture. Why are you interfering? And we filed police reports. We did all the things we thought we could do. And that was kind of a real turning point in the book where I realized, oh, I can't fight these fights. The community has to choose. The culture has to choose for itself. We can give knowledge. We can give empowerment. We can give workshops. We can give trainings. We can provide education. But at the end of the day, the community has to choose for itself, which was the lesson from the beginning, but I had to learn that time and time again before it really sunk in. That line in the book is, it's really dangerous to be a woman. In fact, it can kill you. So that was a really powerful line in the book. It's the culture, it's the families, it's communities. It could be to pay a debt or a dowry. It could also be because there is no culture for dating, right? You're arranged and it's married off, and women are often, and girls are seen as an investment or property. And so a lot of times a 14-year-old girl will fall in love and just be like, well, I can't be with this person because of, I can't date, I can't be in love, so they'll run off. There's that. It's called going puela in the polyculture. So there's so many facets to this issue. Yeah.
Do you feel that what you're doing there has helped to make a positive change in that culture?
Oh, yeah. I know it with every cell in my body that it's right and it works. We have 166 kids in college, and spread out teachers, engineers, and Kima, the rock-breaking girl, is becoming a chef and opening her own business. And education is power. Knowledge is power. It's the greatest equalizing force in the world. It's the best investment that we can make. And it works. It's just that sometimes it's the way that you stop the trajectory of violence and inequality and these things that we're seeing in the world. But it's a lot more complicated than just a backpack and a pencil. Okay? We run a women's center, and we still see cases where, there will be a case of sexual assault, and the punishment for the perpetrator is that he has to marry the victim. Because you break it, you buy it, right? Like, you took her, so now keep her. So it would be like we'd go fight those cases in court with, we'd put her in a safe house, and we'd go through all of these processes, but the community would come out to protect the perpetrator, and we often would be made the bad guy, for example, or we'd have somebody on account of domestic abuse, and they would flip it on the head and come get, so it was these cases are really complicated when it comes to human trafficking, domestic violence, early marriage, and complex. But the answer, like with the Women's Center and with some of these cases, it's because we're trying to go back in time. When a girl is in school, those things don't happen. When she's kept in school, when she's supported, when she's given and knows her power, that's where the change is. In the beginning, a lot of the story started because I hated the model for orphan care, and it's the same in the foster care system. It's a very, all of these, the way that we treat and raise vulnerable and displaced and orphan children is complicated and messy, and we're not doing them justice. So I hated orphanages. They were dark. Just the word orphanage, when you like close your eyes and think of that word, what do you imagine? Dark. You imagine slop on a plate. You imagine somebody unwanted, somebody forgotten, somebody given up, somebody who lost everything. And so really early in the days when we started to write up the vision, I wanted to change all of that. And I was so insistent that we called it a home, that we used language matters. We used words like family and brother and sister and auntie and uncle, which is also cultural to preserving that level of culture. But we sketched up the home, and I wanted the childhood that I had. I wanted to bring pieces, not to like relocate Moorestown to Nepal, but I wanted those essences that I felt like made me who I was to live out. I knew what it was like. I didn't have a fancy college degree, but I knew what it was like to be loved. I knew what it was like to grow up in a loving home, and I wanted to export that part of my childhood. So I wanted bright yellow walls and kites in the sky and marbles and games and soccer balls and swings and nature and meals always on the stove and fruit trees and warm cups of tea in the morning and music always playing. And that was really important. Coziness and warmth, and that was the initial dream of like, can we do this better? And not why did this happen or why was I born this way, but how can we give back? How can we create a model for something different? So it kind of transformed in that stage of the book and my life from the why to the how. And it's entirely community sustained, and we try to keep it community run. Like the Women's Center that we run, we empower and hire widowed women or victims of domestic violence, and then they sew and weave the uniforms. So it's like a full circle, deepening and strengthening the community. I was thinking about how I became a mother. And one thing that you'll get from Nepal is the imagery of kites in the sky. And there's a season where kids are just out flying their kites, and it's a game, and it's beautiful. What I didn't expect, like we went and we sketched out this whole plan about like the home and the school and all of the things that a child needs to thrive and grow, and we were building programs, but I didn't expect to become a mother. And that was kind of a moment for me where it all happened. I wanted to share that. There's a chapter in the book called Ruby Sunshine. Spoiler alert, that's my biological daughter's name. And I thought that I was going to deliver that baby in Nepal in a warm bathtub surrounded by all of my other children. And ultimately, my husband was just like, no, we're not doing this. And in this region of Nepal, it was the number one mortality rate for neonatal deaths and maternity deaths. And there were very few doctors, but I thought I could just, do it the natural way and blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of where Jeremy drew the line. And I really struggled because here I am pregnant. I knew that I was going to love, once you have 58 kids, I knew I was going to love, I love every child, And I knew that love only multiplies, so there was never a question of like, is there enough love in my heart for this? I wanted to make the other kids feel a part and that it wasn't going to be different. And again, it doesn't make sense, so instead of asking why, it's like, how do we create a better world where every person has access to maternal care? How do we create a world where everyone has access to the hospital, where they can have medical interventions? How do we create a world with more equality, more opportunity for everyone? So it's this work that we're being called to do at this time and place in our humanity, with our human family, I think. So family was everything. My biological family, the town that I grew up in, the people stepping up to help and believe in this. Because initially I thought I was just going to babysit my way through it all. And I was like, I'll just go back and I'll babysit and I'll dog sit and I'll plant sit, and at the end of the week I'll send my $700 or whatever I made, $600, $500 back to Nepal. And then I realized that, that's not going to work. I needed a septic tank, and it was $2,200, and I just couldn't babysit my way through it anymore. And so I did a garage sale, because New Jersey loves garage sales, and started collecting neighbors' junk, and that's actually the only reason that my community and the people I babysat for started to realize, she's trying to do something. And everybody stepped up and they bought all of the stuff, and then the local newspaper covered that garage sale story and said, girls trying to build an orphanage in Nepal, and I cringed at the word orphanage, and then I was like, this is awesome, and people stepped in, and it became a community supporting a community. So community is very much rooted throughout the book. So COVID around the world was, I think, what we're looking at as a major backslide when it comes to hunger, early marriage, education. We've had hundreds of millions of children kept out of school, and school is the safe haven for vulnerable, impoverished children in North America, in developing countries, and unlike communities of privilege and power and resources, vulnerable children have no access to internet. They can't do Zoom classroom. They don't have power in their homes. No tablets. So not only were we looking at these inequalities, there was also a huge digital divide. So where people of privilege, born into the right race or families, could just, pivot and jump online, the rest of the world couldn't. So I think it really it really highlighted the inequalities and injustices of our world. What happened in Nepal, and I was there for the first, 7-8 months of COVID, is that daily wage labor stopped and migrant work stopped. And so we had those millions of people without work. It was also the dry season when COVID hit. So if you're a Nepali person living in the Himalayas, you have these seasons where you have food, and you have seasons where you don't, and you have seasons where you're more hungry, and you have seasons with more abundance. So there was no food at that time, and then daily wage labor, like the rock breakers, had to stop, and then it was the worst tragedy and human suffering I've ever seen. We had people coming to the gates, just skin and bones, pregnant women, a woman who just delivered a baby, mothers, communities. We started doing food drop-offs at each and every village that we could get to, and we'd get swarmed, so we needed police, and we had to fire gunshots into the air as we tried to get resources. And then, we had to keep the kids safe and find ways to do that. And then we had 1 million migrants stuck at the border that we couldn't get back into their villages, because it was like, if we send Nepali migrants living in India who had just gone there to work for a migrant season back, we were worried that COVID would infect rural Himalayan villages and elders, and we couldn't take that risk because there was no medical infrastructure. But if we kept migrants in Nepal, they were starving to death. And so we had to really step in as a team. And we got to the streets, and the media wasn't covering it, actually. And so I went there, and we saw the problems at the border. We saw people walking hundreds of kilometers. And unfortunately, this is how the media works. They won't cover a brown Nepali migrant woman sleeping by the road with her 5 children, but they will cover a white woman who looks like me. So we sat there. The power of Instagram, TikTok, it went viral around the world. And by like 3 o'clock the next day, I mean, there had been months at this point of suffering, but the whole world really came together. The embassies, the Nepali government woke up, and I think the UN flew in like 7 days later, and we were able to lead a huge migrant. We created migrant camps for women and children, and we named it the Welcome Home Nepal campaign, Welcome Home Nepal, to change the stigma against migrants and the narrative that they were tainted or going to bring COVID into the country. So it was really special. And it went from the worst thing I've ever seen in my life to the most positive. I mean, there was tragedy and there was loss of life, but it was an example of people coming together. So there is good that happens when we come together. I was actually just with 2 of my children last week. They were on spring break. I have one child at Notre Dame University and one at Whitman. And I never went to college. I never went back. But it was so fun getting to drop them. And now I'm living vicariously through them. They're like telling me about dance floor makeouts and like their classes and what they're learning about and the parties and just all of that. So it's been really, really fun and a fun chapter. And interestingly enough, my older children were there with my babies and my toddlers. So I had every single age group. Nisha's applying for jobs in her last year of college. Krishna just started and is in the U.S. figuring it out. And then I had a baby and a toddler. And the week that my books arrived in the mail was the week that my children were home with me and Jeremy. We were all together. And Krishna took the book and read it in a single night, just sat down and read it. And Nisha got to page 4 and was like, I can't do this. This is so hard. And I walked into the living room. She was like hysterically crying. But the question that they both asked me first when they read the book was, why did you pick me? And we talked very openly about that. Krishna had highlighted certain chapters of stories they didn't know. Again, like the why me, which I think is such an interesting theme. And we had to talk really openly about that. But writing this book was so hard because I felt this immense responsibility and pressure to be honest and talk about all of this intersection of so many hot button issues, privilege, saviorism, volunteerism, adoption, child rights, development work, this vast and very complicated field of work. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't get it right. How am I going to pass the baton on to the next generation of people who will travel? And for young people who I wanted to read the book, it was too much pressure. I had so many sleepless nights. I bit all of my nails off. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to throw it out the window. And the only thing that got me through putting it together was thinking about the moment of handing it to my children and knowing that I'd done my best. And so it was such a powerful moment for me to hand the book to the kids, knowing that there will be mistakes. There's going to be things I didn't get well. There's things I left out or things I put in there that I shouldn't have. But everything that I was carrying went out the window in that moment because that was the moment that I realized I did what I had to do, and I wanted them to have the story live on after me. The story came out, it was this huge spread in Cosmo Girl, and I got thousands of emails. Our blog got shut down. It was every girl across America being like, they didn't care about the makeup, the lip gloss, the eyeliner, anything. They were just like, thank you, I needed a story like this. Now I see what's possible. And young women didn't need more celebrity gossip or sex culture. They really needed like a story about inspiration, and that was a huge wake-up moment for me. And then the next year, our story was on the back of the Doritos bag, the Cool Ranch flavor. Does anyone remember that? So, like, people thought that I was missing, or like, the Cool Ranch, and then, so it was like all the bags of Cool Ranch. For years, we were on the Cool Ranch flavor. And we just try to make it real. Like, you know, when you're walking down the streets of Moorestown, unfortunately, we don't, like, your proximity to suffering or, you know, the plight of children isn't as, there is suffering and it's all real, but you don't see it as much. It's not, you have to seek it out more in our culture. So we try to use and leverage social media to do that and to tell the stories and make it real, because stories have the power to change all of us. And it's how we've thrived as an organization. We're completely 100% sustained on donations, but we also make it real and make it fun. And the kids are up there winning soccer tournaments. We ended up starting the first ever girls soccer team. One of our girls just made the national team, so it's a place of hope and like just lightness, but also the other things, the hard challenges that we're up against. And we love for people to be involved. And thank you for having me today. Thank you to First Baptist for hosting this beautiful event.